Last week, Mineral Resources Minister Susan Shabangu announced government's plan to take a 20% free stake in all new oil and gas ventures. ENS Africa's Senior Associate Luke Haverman joins me in studio to discuss this. Luke, please can you outline the biggest changes to the original plan?
Well, if we look at the Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Bill, there are many changes when you talk about the plan that South Africa is going to implement for dealing with our oil and gas resources. There are many changes afoot. The primary ones that spring to mind for me are the disbandment of the Petroleum Agency of South Africa, the introduction of the free carried interest, possibly at 20%, the introduction of a beneficiation requirement. Those certainly spring to mind as big changes in the original game plan, so to speak. Our oil and gas legislation is going through a significant revamp, if you'd like to use that word, and I'd say those three stand out head and shoulders above the rest.
How did this come to pass?
Well, I suppose I should answer that question by looking at South Africa's from an oil and gas perspective. Our resources are such that we've never been considered an oil and gas endowed state. So fairly recently, with the possibility of significant shale gas resources and a renewed interest in our potential offshore oil and gas resources, the state has woken up, so to speak, and there have been calls for the state to look at the legislative and regulatory frameworks that govern this industry. And in that process, the government has looked overseas and seen that a free carried interest is not uncommon in the oil and gas sector, and have taken the decision to take up that free carried interest and introduce it through the MPRDA bill.
How does this decision affect South Africa's oil and gas industry?
The oil and gas industry at the moment is looking at the MPRDA bill. They've commented on it during last month's public hearings. There's been a bit of a backlash in terms of the lack of clarity. The mention recently by Minister Shabangu of the 20% has yet to be seen in writing. There's also mention of additional possible 30%, as well as the 26% BEE. So for industry, it's affected them from the perspective of, is this a reason enough not to invest in South Africa, or not to invest as heavily as we thought it would? It's going to affect industry's bottom line.
Luke, thank you so much for your insights. That was ENS Africa's Senior Associate Luke Haverman.